Chapter 20. Siddle's frightened expression seemed to please Hannibal. He took the book from Siddle's hand and put the nursery rhyme book aside. Don't panic, it's different from what you think. This is just a psychology book that introduces some experiments on why good people can commit evil acts in certain situations. Siddle. So this person knew what she was thinking just now. Are you interested in psychology? The man tilted his head, his indigo eyes carrying a faint smile. The content of this kind of introductory book can't be called stupid and shallow, but it's really very basic. Actually, I think it's quite boring. Do you want to go to a quiet place with me? Maybe we can chat for a while. He said in a refined tone. I think your mother would also accept us talking privately. Siddle angrily turned to look at Ray, who was indeed sitting on the sofa, leisurely enjoying tea and glancing at her with approval. Strangely enough, Ray and Hannibal had only met for 10 minutes, and when they appeared before Siddle again, Siddle could feel that her nervousness and anxiety about coming here had lessened. Oh. Are psychology professors that magical? Siddle muttered to herself, reluctantly taking Hannibal's outstretched hand, pretending to be innocent, raising her head to ask, should I call you Uncle Hannibal, or Dr. Lecter? Hannibal paused for a moment, lowered his head to look at her and smiled. You can call me whatever you want, my dear. But calling me doctor is really a bit early now, he said leisurely. After all, my medical license hasn't been approved yet. Siddle. So this guy doesn't even have a medical license. Where did her mother find this kind of no-good to treat her daughter? She suddenly thought of the highly respected, incredibly capable priest that her father sought out. She wondered if the wound on the priest's neck that Annabelle had scratched had healed yet. Hannibal led Siddle into the study, placed the Lucifer effect on the table, and carried her to sit on the soft leather chair. I don't think you mind waiting a while. The chair was opposite the study. The sandalwood table was clean, neat, and well-proportioned, just like this study. The overall style was very simple and elegant. There were 3 huge bookcases placed here, compared to the decorative bookcases in the living room. The books and documents displayed in this room were clearly more professional. There was a small stove burning on the table, and on the stove was a purple clay teapot. The man took out a purple clay tea set, bent down. The firelight from the stove reflected on half of his face and straight nose. The water was boiling. Hannibal slowly poured the boiling water to heat the teacup, and then, he skillfully and nimbly brought a steaming cup of tea to Siddle. I was going to prepare cold yogurt for you, he said with a smile, but, it seems like you don't like sweets very much. Hannibal noticed the candy left behind by Siddle. Even though he didn't like the person in front of him, Siddle still had to admit that he was meticulous and thoughtful. The attitude of this third person was so elegant that it was almost perfect, making it difficult for people to feel disgusted. The tea was hot, so it couldn't be drunk yet. But being treated so carefully and considerately by someone else made Siddle, who had only the mentality of avoiding and coming for show, feel quite embarrassed, and she reluctantly praised Hannibal. Dr. Lecter, you are truly a gentleman. Hannibal still had his usual gentle smile on his face. Hearing this, his expression did not change much. Learning to be polite is probably not a bad thing, my dear. He said, rudeness will degrade a person's character. It makes people violent, irritable, impulsive, like a bull in heat. You are not that kind of rude and lowly creature, are you? Hannibal looked at her with his deep indigo eyes. My dear. Siddle frowned. I disagree with your opinion, Dr. Lecter. Rudeness is a very subjective thing. Calling others rude and lowly is not good behavior. She thought for a moment and gave an example. For example, today when you were having lunch, you bit a piece of shit in your sandwich. At that time you couldn't help but blurt out a word of damn. I don't think anyone would think you were very rude. Everyone can understand why you were so agitated. The man opposite seemed to be amused by Siddle's example, the corners of his lips slightly raised, his voice filled with joy. That's a very interesting way of thinking. I will consider adding it to my scope of social psychology academic research. After saying a few sentences, Siddle couldn't help but feel thirsty. She picked up the teacup and took a sip. The taste was as expected, but a few drops of tea splashed on her clothes. Siddle raised her head and saw Hannibal still looking at her. She paused, wiping the drops of water on her sleeve as if nothing had happened. You may not know that in China there is a proverb that says don't be fussy about small things. Low EQ is rude, high EQ is not fussy about details. In short, it is impossible to be absolutely elegant, especially in Japanese tea ceremony. Siddle could not understand why drinking water requires enjoying the patterns on the teacup for half a day. Hannibal did not seem to care much. My aunt taught me tea ceremony as well as how to live. She is Japanese, well, there aren't many taboos on this matter. On the contrary, he sat behind the desk, looking at Siddle with his indigo eyes, somewhat interested, as if looking at a rare object. Since you already know that I am your psychiatrist, do you know what will happen next? No, Siddle shook his head and saw Hannibal take out a blank sheet of drawing paper from the bookshelf beside him. Do you have any hobbies? Like drawing? He asked, placing a pen in front of Siddle. Let's play a game. Siddle guessed what Hannibal would say, and sure enough, he proposed the human treehouse test, a famous analytical test in psychology. But unexpectedly, Hannibal said that he would also draw a picture with Siddle. It's not fair for one person to play a game. The handsome man's attitude seemed unpredictable as he said, to be fair, you can also ask me to draw a picture, the content is up to you, okay? This seemed fair. Siddle sighed inwardly. Hannibal obviously saw that she had come here unwillingly under the pretext of playing a game. However, she knew that if she couldn't get the psychologist to give her parents a satisfactory answer, these troubles would probably never stop. The little girl calmly raised her head, okay. But, I want you to draw the person who has had the greatest influence on you. Is that okay? Dr. Lecter. Hannibal then agreed without hesitation. In the end, Siddle asked for a set of colored pencils, indicating that she was about to create a great work. Hannibal just casually picked up a pencil and started drawing, scribbling on the paper while happily humming a song, seemingly in a very good mood. After a while, Siddle finished the picture. She sat still obediently. When she saw the drawing paper Hannibal handed over, a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. On the snow-white drawing paper appeared the image of an elegant and noble Oriental woman. It was hard to imagine that such a delicate level of perfection could be drawn by a person in less than half an hour. This is my aunt, Mrs. Z, the handsome young university professor said with a hint of nostalgia. I was raised by her. She could be said to be the most profound influence in my life. Siddle was silent for a moment, as if she could not bring out her drawing. But under Hannibal's gentle and expectant gaze, she slowly pushed her drawing over. Then Hannibal was silent. He held Siddle's drawing paper and rarely fell into deep thought. The white paper was covered with indistinct lines drawn with colorful pens, but if you looked closely, you could actually distinguish the shapes of houses, trees, and people. Siddle began to explain to him, this house is a magic tower, and it is where magic fairies live. By the way, do you know what a magic fairy is? Hannibal thought for a moment and said that he had never heard of it, then received a disparaging look from the little girl. If you don't have a medical license, then forget it, and you don't know how to do research before doing psychological counseling for children. Hannibal, you are so unprofessional. Hannibal. Before he could figure out the connection between not knowing what a magical fairy is and unprofessional, Siddle quickly babbled on about the characters in the painting. The one on the left is the dark fairy, she is very evil, the one on the right is. Siddle had already told Hannibal the entire content of the painting, and what surprised her was. Apart from being a little surprised at first, Hannibal had seriously listened to her trivial details about magical girls and justice and evil, and he even seemed to enjoy it. After Siddle finished speaking, he even lightly clapped his hands, his indigo eyes filled with appreciation. The plot of the story is so interesting. Hannibal's attitude was very good. Even Siddle, who was always making trouble, couldn't help but feel guilty, although the next second she continued to speak eloquently. I think so too, so I'm sharing it with you. She didn't want to make a fuss, but the point was that although she had decided to receive psychological treatment before, after all this, Siddle found that she still didn't want to open up to this man. Siddle decided to ask Ray to find a normal psychiatrist for her as soon as she left. It didn't matter who it was. Anyway, as long as he wasn't the kind of person who would make her hair stand on end with a glance or a smile at random, it was fine. For example, the young and promising Hannibal Lecter in front of her, who seemed extremely educated and elegant, both refined and rational. However, Siddle's messing around clearly didn't have the desired effect. Perhaps taken aback by Siddle's words and actions, Hannibal was silent for a moment, then suddenly chuckled. He leaned back slightly, sitting comfortably on the chair, his right hand twirling the sketching pencil casually, looking at Siddle with interest and smiling. Do you know that children will never call themselves children? Unless they get into trouble. He added leisurely, but his indigo eyes were like a clever snake, gently looking at Siddle. So, my dear. Hannibal's smile remained unchanged, a hint of curiosity appeared on his handsome face. Why did you set fire to the Rocky Mountains?